Everyone feared the arrogant rich man, until the cleaner shamed him in front of everyone. Michael Thompson felt his hands tremble as fury rose in his chest. This couldn't be happening, not here, not in front of the most important people in his career. The yellow liquid dripped down his face, fell from his chin and stained the suit that cost more than 3 months' salary for any employee. Mustard. That woman had thrown mustard on him. The cleaner stood a few feet away, holding the yellow bottle with an expression he couldn't decipher. It wasn't anger, it wasn't fear. It was something worse. It was dignity. The company's convention hall was completely silent. The 30 executives who moments before were discussing numbers and strategies now stared fixedly at the scene. Michael felt the weight of every pair of eyes on him. Among those present were the 3 investors from Chicago, the ones who could save his company from the crisis that only he knew was much worse than anyone imagined. "Miss Helen, have you lost your mind?" Michael's voice came out higher than he intended. Helen Parker didn't move. She was in her early 50s, her hair tied in a simple bun, her navy blue uniform impeccably clean. Her hands, calloused from so much work, held the bottle as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "No, Mr. Michael, I've finally regained my sanity." Her voice was calm, firm, without any trace of the nervousness he was used to provoking in her. Michael tried to wipe his face with his hands, but only spread more of the yellow sauce. Some executives began to shift uncomfortably in their chairs. He needed to take control of the situation, but how? How to explain this? "Someone call security," he shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. "This woman is fired." That's when Sarah Patterson, the director of human resources, stood up. She was a middle-aged woman, always discreet, always efficient. Michael had known her for 15 years, since he himself was just an ambitious manager. "Mr. Michael, before we call security, I think everyone here deserves to know what happened." "What happened?" Michael gestured frantically. "It's clear what happened. This crazy woman assaulted me." Helen finally placed the bottle on a nearby table. Her eyes, which Michael had so often seen lowered and submissive, now stared directly at him. "I didn't assault you, Mr. Michael. I just did what you did to me every week for the past 8 years." The silence in the hall grew even heavier. Michael felt something cold run down his spine. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. "What are you talking about, woman?" Sarah Patterson walked to the center of the hall, positioning herself between Michael and Helen. She held a tablet in her hands. "3 months ago, we installed cameras on every floor of the company. It was a security measure approved by the board. You signed the authorization, remember?" Michael remembered. Of course he remembered. But the cameras were to protect against theft, against dishonest employees, not for... "In the last 3 months, Ms. Helen has been publicly humiliated by you 17 times, all recorded." Sarah slid her finger across the tablet screen. "Last week, you threw mustard on her uniform because she was cleaning the hallway on the 10th floor while you were passing by. One of the investors from Chicago, a man with graying hair and thin glasses, leaned forward in his chair. Michael knew him as Henry Sullivan, owner of one of the largest supermarket chains in the South. "Is this true, Thompson?" His voice was deep, controlled. She was in the way. I had an important meeting and you thought throwing food at an employee was the appropriate solution?" Sarah continued, her voice still calm, but with an undertone of steel. "Or when you tore up the papers from her cleaning cart and threw everything on the floor, saying she was useless and couldn't even do the simplest job in the world." Michael felt the sweat mixing with the mustard on his face. This was getting out of control. He needed to turn the game around. He needed... "Look, I admit that sometimes I can be impatient, but that doesn't justify physical aggression." Physical aggression. Helen finally spoke again, and something in her voice made everyone in the room pay attention. "Do you know how many times I cried in the bathroom of this company? How many times I thought about giving up, about ending it all, because the humiliation was too much?" Michael opened his mouth to respond, but Helen raised her hand asking for silence, and surprisingly he quieted down. "But I'm not going to talk about myself now. I'm going to talk about you." Helen walked until she was face to face with Michael. She was at least 8 inches shorter than him, but at that moment she seemed much taller. I've worked at this company for 12 years. I saw you arrive here as an intern. Remember, Mr. Michael? 15 years ago when you were 22 and didn't even have money for a proper lunch? Something in Michael's memory stirred. An old memory, buried under layers of success and ambition. I was the one who cleaned the intern's floor, Helen continued. And I saw a skinny boy, always with the same worn-out shoes, who worked late while others went to bars. One day, I found you crying in the bathroom. You had just received the news that your father was sick and needed an expensive surgery. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Michael felt his legs weaken. He remembered that day. He remembered it perfectly. His father, Joseph Thompson, a taxi driver who had worked his whole life to give his son an education, needed emergency heart surgery. The basic health insurance he had didn't cover the procedure. Michael was desperate, without money, without options. You don't have the right to tell the truth? Helen opened the purse hanging on her shoulder. From it, she pulled out an envelope yellowed with time. Do you remember this? Michael looked at the envelope and felt his heart stop. He recognized that handwriting. It was his, from 15 years ago. Sarah approached and took the envelope from Helen's hands. Carefully she opened it and took out a sheet of paper. Her voice trembled slightly as she began to read. Mrs. Helen, I don't know how to thank you. You barely knew me, but you lent me all the money you had saved to help with my father's surgery. I promise I will repay every cent as soon as I can. You saved his life. I will never forget your kindness. With eternal gratitude, Michael Thompson. The silence in the room was absolute. Michael felt as if the floor was opening beneath his feet. He had forgotten. How could he have forgotten? You repaid the money, Helen said, her voice now softer. It took 3 years, but you repaid every last cent, and more. You gave me double the amount. By that time, you were already a manager. You were starting to climb in the company. Then why? Michael could barely form the words. Why did you let me? Because I thought it was a phase. I thought success had gone to your head, but that good boy was still inside. Helen shook her head slowly. But as the years passed, you got worse, more cruel, more arrogant, and not just with me, with all the employees you considered inferior. One of the younger executives, Paul Henry, stood up. He was about 30 years old, always well-dressed, always smiling in meetings, but now his face was serious. May I speak? He looked at Sarah, who nodded. 6 months ago, my mother had a stroke. She was in the ICU and the doctors didn't know if she would survive. I had to miss 2 days of work to stay with her in the hospital. When I returned, Mr. Michael called me into his office and said I was weak, that real men don't miss work because of family crying. He said if I missed 1 more day, I would be fired. Paul took a deep breath before continuing. My mother passed away 3 days later. I couldn't be with her in her final hours because I was afraid of losing my job. She waited for me, but I arrived too late. The last thing she told me was that she understood, that I needed to work, but I will never forgive myself. Paul's voice broke at the end. Some executives looked down, others at Michael. Henry Sullivan, the investor, closed the folder he had opened in front of him. Michael tried to speak but couldn't. What could he say? How could he defend himself against that? Another person stood up. It was Carly Miller, secretary from the 12th floor, a woman in her early 40s, always discreet. My daughter has type 1 diabetes. She needs special insulin that costs a lot. 2 years ago, I asked for a small raise because I could barely afford her medicine. You not only denied it, but demoted me and cut my salary by 20%. You said if I didn't like it, the door was open. Carly wiped a tear that ran down her face. I had to borrow money from loan sharks to keep buying the insulin. To this day, I pay outrageous interest because I can't pay off the debt. My daughter is 12 years old. Sometimes she gets sick at school because I have to ration the insulin to make the money last until the end of the month. Michael felt nauseous. He vaguely remembered denying someone a raise, but he didn't remember the details, didn't remember there was a sick child involved. One after another, employees began to stand up. Each told a story. A man who lost his home because Michael had cut his salary without warning. A woman who had to take her daughter out of private school because he had humiliated her so much that she developed panic disorder and had to step away. A young man who tried to ask for help when he found out his father had cancer, but was fired the same day. Sarah Patterson waited for everyone to finish speaking. Then she turned to Michael. For 3 months, I documented all of this. Not just the physical and verbal abuse, but also the decisions you made that deliberately harmed employees who were in difficult situations. And I found something interesting. She slid her finger across the tablet again. In the last 5 years, our company's turnover rate has increased by 300%. We lost the best talent to the competition. Our rating on job platforms dropped to 1.5 out of 5 stars, and there are 18 ongoing labor lawsuits that have been kept confidential. Henry Sullivan stood up. The other 2 investors did the same. Mr. Thompson, I came here today because I was considering investing $5 million in your company, but after what I've seen and heard, not only will I not invest, but I will make sure no other serious investor does business with you. Wait, Michael finally found his voice. This can all be explained. I was under pressure. The company was in financial trouble. The company was in financial trouble, Sarah interrupted. Or were you embezzling funds? The silence that followed was deafening. Michael felt the blood drain from his face. What are you talking about? Sarah walked until she stood in front of him. His eyes, usually friendly, were now hard as steel. 2 months ago, I found irregularities in the financial reports, undeclared expenses, payments to shell companies, suspicious transfers. I hired an independent auditor to investigate discreetly. The report was completed yesterday. She handed a thick folder to Henry Sullivan, who immediately began flipping through it. Over the past 3 years, you've embezzled approximately $2 million from the company. Money that should have gone to improvements, salary increases, benefits. Money that could have saved the jobs of dozens of people who were laid off due to cost-cutting. Michael felt his legs give way. He leaned on the nearest table, leaving mustard stains on the glass top. I was going to pay it all back. It was just temporary. Temporary? Sarah laughed humorlessly. You bought a penthouse apartment last year, an imported car, a yacht, all with embezzled money while your employees struggled. Henry Sullivan slammed the folder shut. The sound echoed through the hall like a gunshot. I've seen enough, gentlemen. He turned to the other investors. Let's go. I don't want my name associated with this. The 3 men began walking toward the exit. Michael took a few staggering steps toward them. Please, I can explain. I can fix this. Henry stopped at the door and turned around. Do you know what the saddest part of all this is, Thompson? It's not the theft. It's not the humiliations. It's the waste. You had potential. Everyone here said you were good when you started. But you chose to become this. He gestured vaguely in Michael's direction. A man covered in mustard, alone, without friends, without respect, without dignity. You did this to yourself. The investors left. The sound of their footsteps echoed down the hallway until it faded completely. Michael looked around the hall. All the executives were standing now. Some looked at him with anger, others with pity, but most with indifference, as if he no longer mattered. The meeting is adjourned, Sarah announced. Everyone may return to their departments except you, Michael. You have a meeting with the board of directors in 1 hour. I suggest you clean up first. The executives began to leave. Some stopped to shake Helen's hand, murmuring words of support. Paul Henry hugged her, crying openly. Carly Miller held her hands and thanked her quietly. Within minutes, only 3 people remained in the hall: Michael, Helen, and Sarah. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Michael finally managed to move. He walked slowly to a chair and sat down, not caring about the mustard staining the upholstery. Why? He asked, looking at Helen. Why did you wait so long? Helen pulled up a chair and sat in front of him. Even seated, she maintained that dignified posture that had irritated him before, but now only made him feel small. Because I had hope. Hope that you would become who you used to be, she sighed. But last week, when you threw that mustard at me and laughed while I cleaned it up, something changed. I looked into your eyes and saw nothing left of the boy who cried in the bathroom because his father was sick. You had turned into a monster." "I'm not a monster." "No," Sarah approached. "Then what do you call someone who sees a desperate mother begging to buy medicine for her daughter and punishes her for it? What do you call someone who prevents a son from being with his mother in her final hours?" Michael didn't answer. He had no answer. "The meeting with the board is to decide your future in the company," Sarah continued. "They already know everything. The embezzlement, the humiliations, the lawsuits. There's a vote scheduled for your removal." "But this is my company!" Michael finally exploded. "I built this. I turned a small office into one of the largest consulting firms in New York City." "You didn't build it alone," Helen replied calmly. "You had help from hundreds of people who worked hard, who believed in you, who gave their blood and sweat. And you spat in the face of every one of them." Michael buried his face in his hands. The mustard was already starting to dry, leaving an uncomfortable crust on his skin. "What do I do now?" Sarah and Helen exchanged a look. Something passed between them, a silent communication. "You have a choice," Sarah said. "You can go to that meeting and try to defend yourself. Claim it was all a misunderstanding, that you were under pressure, that you'll return the money. The board will probably fire you anyway, but at least you leave with the illusion that you fought. Or you can do what you should have done a long time ago." Helen stood up. "You can admit you were wrong, you can offer sincere apologies, and you can start fixing the damage you've done." Michael laughed bitterly. "How? How do I fix something like that? I destroyed lives, I destroyed families." "It won't be easy," Helen admitted. "And it might be too late for some things, but you can try." She reached out her hand to Michael. He looked at that calloused hand, marked by hard work, and then at Helen's face. In her eyes, he didn't see anger or satisfaction at having humiliated him. He saw sadness. "Why do you still care?" he asked, genuinely confused. "After everything I've done?" "Because I remember the boy you were, and because I believe people can change. I don't know if you will change, but at least I'll give you the chance. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing." Michael looked at the outstretched hand for a few more seconds. Then, slowly, he took it. Helen helped him up. "Come," she said. "Let's get this mustard off you, and then we'll have a serious talk about what happens from now on." The three of them left the hall in silence. Through the company's corridors, employees stopped what they were doing to watch Michael pass. Some whispered, others just stared. But no one averted their gaze in fear like before. Helen led him to the janitor's locker room. It was a small space, with rusty lockers and a strong smell of cleaning products. She grabbed a clean towel and wet it in the sink. "Sit." She pointed to a wooden bench. Michael obeyed. Helen began carefully wiping the mustard from his face, like a mother cleaning a child's face. The gesture was so gentle, so full of care, that Michael felt tears burning his eyes. "Why are you doing this?" "Because that's what decent people do. They help, even when there's nothing to gain from it." The tears began to fall. For the first time in years, Michael Thompson cried. They weren't discreet, contained tears. They were deep sobs that shook his whole body. Years of anger, frustration, loneliness, and emptiness overflowed all at once. Helen said nothing. She just kept cleaning his face until all the mustard was gone. Then she sat beside him and waited for him to calm down. When the sobs finally subsided, Michael wiped his eyes with the backs of his hands. "I became everything I hated," he said, his voice hoarse. "My father was a taxi driver. He was humiliated every day by rich customers who treated him like trash. I swore that when I became successful, I'd never be like that, and I ended up being worse." "What changed?" Helen asked gently. Michael was silent for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. "I don't know. I guess it was gradual. At first, when I started climbing the corporate ladder, I just wanted to prove my worth. But later, the more success I had, the more I felt I needed to prove, that I needed to show I was better than others. And somewhere along the way, I started confusing being better with being above. And the embezzled money. It started small, Michael admitted, some inflated expenses here and there, but it got easier each time. I convinced myself I deserved it, that I worked harder than everyone, that I made more sacrifices. But the truth is, I just wanted more, always more. Sarah, who had remained silent near the door, finally spoke. There might be a way for you to salvage something from this situation, but it will require you to give up everything. What? Your pride, your need for control, your position. Sarah walked until she stood before him. And perhaps your freedom for some time. Michael swallowed hard. Go on. You go to the meeting and confess everything. Not just the financial misconduct, but all of it. The humiliations, the abuses, everything. You commit to returning every penny you embezzled, plus interest. You resign as chairman, and you offer to work in the company at the lowest available position with the corresponding salary for the next 2 years. That's insane. Michael stood up abruptly. I can't. You can and will, Helen interrupted, also standing. Or else you go to prison, because Sarah already has everything documented. If you don't accept this proposal, she'll hand it all over to the district attorney. Michael looked from one woman to the other. They were serious. It wasn't an empty threat. Why are you giving me this option? Because I believe in second chances, Helen said. But you have to earn it. You have to experience firsthand what it's like to be at the bottom. You have to understand what it means to live on minimum wage, to be treated as invisible, to be just another number. And if I accept, will the board agree? I've already spoken with them, Sarah revealed. They're willing to consider it, especially since some employees have made it clear they want to press criminal charges against you. If you accept the proposal, they'll ask them to drop the lawsuits. Some? How many lawsuits are we talking about? 23, Sarah replied without emotion. 23 employees you harmed enough for them to consult lawyers. There are probably more who don't have money to hire legal representation. Michael felt his legs weaken again. He leaned against the nearest cabinet. I ruined many lives. Yes, Helen agreed, but you can start making amends from now on. How? By accepting the consequences, working to repair the damage, being the person you should have been. Michael closed his eyes. His mind was spinning in circles. Everything he had built was crumbling. His reputation, his position, his future. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was a chance to rebuild something better. And if I accept, what would my position be? Janitorial assistant, Helen said with a slight smile. Working under my supervision. Michael opened his eyes and looked at her. For a moment, he thought she was mocking him, but her eyes were serious. You want me to work as a janitor? Yes, waking up at 5 in the morning, cleaning bathrooms, emptying trash cans, mopping floors, doing everything you've seen so many times but never paid attention to. For 2 years. For 2 years. And at the end of that time, if you've truly changed, there might be a place for you in the company again. Not as chairman, but as someone who understands the value of every person. Michael looked at his hands. Hands that had never known hard labor. Hands that signed contracts but never held a broom. Hands that pushed people down instead of lifting them up. And if I refuse, then you leave here, go home, get a lawyer, and prepare for criminal charges. Embezzlement, misappropriation, workplace harassment. The lawyers I consulted said you could get between 8 and 12 years. Silence filled the small locker room. The distant sound of phones ringing and people talking in the corridors seemed to come from another world. Michael thought of his father. Joseph Thompson had worked as a taxi driver for 40 years. Honest, hard, poorly paid work, but always with dignity. When Michael was in college, his father used to say, no matter how high you climb in life, never forget you're the son of a working man. Treat everyone with respect, because that's what makes you human. But he had forgotten, or worse, he had chosen to forget. My father would be ashamed of me, he said quietly. Yes, Helen agreed gently. But he also taught you there's always time to do the right thing. You told me that 15 years ago, remember? When you returned my money with interest. Said your father always taught that a real man takes responsibility for his actions. Michael remembered. He remembered everything now. How had he forgotten? How had he strayed so far from who he was? I accept, he said finally. I accept working as a cleaning assistant for 2 years, and I'll return every penny I took. Sarah nodded and made some notes on her tablet. The board meeting is in 40 minutes. You'll need a clean suit. I brought a spare one I keep at the office. Come with me. The three left the locker room. As they walked through the corridors, more employees stopped to watch. Michael kept his eyes down, feeling the weight of every stare. This was only the beginning. The next 2 years would be much harder. In Sarah's office, he changed clothes while she organized the documents for the meeting. Helen waited outside, giving him privacy. When he came out, wearing the simple suit Sarah had lent him, he barely recognized himself in the mirror. Without the arrogance, without the pose, he just looked like a tired, middle-aged man. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked. "No," Michael admitted. "But let's go anyway." The boardroom was on the 15th floor, the top of the building. Michael had spent countless hours there, making decisions that affected hundreds of lives. But he had never felt the real weight of those decisions until now. The 7 board members were already seated when he entered. Among them was Robert Fletcher, the company's senior partner, a man in his early 60s who had known Michael since his intern days. There was also Beatrice Anderson, the financial director, whose icy stare made Michael look away. The other members were a mix of veteran executives and shareholder representatives. Robert Fletcher, seated at the head of the table, gestured for Michael to sit, but not at the opposite head, where he always sat. At the far end of the table, the spot traditionally reserved for employees being disciplined. "Mr. Thompson," Robert began, his voice formal and distant, "thank you for attending this extraordinary meeting. I presume Ms. Patterson has already informed you of the charges." "Yes," Michael replied, his voice coming out weaker than he intended. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Yes, she has." "Then you know we have evidence of embezzlement, misappropriation, and systematic workplace harassment of employees under your supervision." "Yes, sir." Robert leaned back in his chair, studying Michael with eyes that had seen much over 30 years at the company. "I remember when you first came here, Michael. I remember a brilliant young man, determined, full of ideas. You revolutionized our consulting department. Brought in clients we never imagined we could get. You were exceptional." Michael felt something tighten in his throat. "But somewhere along the way, you lost your path," Robert continued. "And not only did you lose it, you chose a path that hurt many people. People who trusted you, who worked for you, who believed in you." "I know." "Knowing isn't enough," Beatrice Anderson interrupted. Her voice was sharp as a blade. "Actions have consequences, Mr. Thompson, and your actions have caused significant damage not only to the employees, but to this company's reputation." "I understand." "Do you really?" She leaned forward. "We've received 15 contract cancellation requests in the last 3 hours. The news of what happened is already spreading. Our stocks have fallen 12% since the market opened, and there are journalists calling wanting statements about the labor lawsuits." Michael felt nauseous. He knew the consequences would be bad, but he hadn't imagined they'd be so swift. "Ms. Patterson presented us with a proposal," Robert said. "A proposal that frankly some of us find absurd." "And others of us find brilliant," another board member, George Matthews, added. He was the youngest of the group, in his 40s, known for his progressive views. "Before we discuss the proposal," Robert raised his hand, asking for silence. "I want to hear from you, Michael. No excuses, no justifications. What do you have to say?" Michael took a deep breath. This was the moment, the chance to at least try to start fixing everything. "I have no excuses," he began. "I was wrong in everything. I became exactly the kind of person I used to hate. I humiliated people who didn't deserve it. I stole money that wasn't mine. I caused unnecessary suffering because my ego was more important than basic humanity." He looked directly at Robert. "You're right when you say I lost my way. But it wasn't by accident. I chose. Every time I humiliated someone, I chose. When I embezzled money, I chose. When I destroyed innocent people's lives, I chose, and I have to live with that. And the proposal? Robert asked. 2 years working as a cleaning assistant, return all the embezzled money plus 20% interest, resign from the position of president, accept constant supervision. Does all that seem appropriate to you? No, Michael answered honestly. It doesn't seem appropriate. It seems too little for the damage I've caused, but it's a start. And I need a start somewhere. Beatrice shook her head, clearly dissatisfied. This doesn't repair the damage. Paul Henry lost his last hours with his mother because of you. Carly Miller still owes money to loan sharks because you unfairly cut her salary. Do you think 2 years cleaning bathrooms fixes that? No, Michael admitted. It doesn't fix it. Nothing I do will fix it. But at least I can try to understand. Understand what it's like to wake up at 5 in the morning and work to exhaustion for a salary that barely pays the bills. Understand what it's like to be invisible, to be treated as less than human. Pretty words, Beatrice said sarcastically, but words are easy. Action is hard. Then give me the chance to prove it with actions, Michael replied, his voice firmer now. Give me these 2 years. At the end, if you think I haven't changed at all, you can do whatever you want with me. Criminal charges, prison, whatever. But give me the chance to try. Robert looked at the other board members. One by one, they made discreet gestures. Some nodded positively, others negatively. The vote is tied, Robert announced after a few minutes. 3 in favor, 3 against, which means my vote is the deciding one. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. The silence in the room was absolute. Michael could hear his own heart beating. Robert stood up and walked to the window, looking at the city below. For long moments he said nothing. When he finally turned around, there were tears in his eyes. My father was a janitor, he said, his voice choked. He worked cleaning offices for 40 years. He suffered all kinds of humiliation. He was treated as invisible, as if he weren't a real person with dreams and feelings. But he never lost his dignity, and he always told me, Robert, when you move up in life, never forget where you came from. Never forget that people like me make the world go round. He returned to his seat at the head of the table. I thought you understood that, Michael. I thought, coming from where you did, you would never be like those who humiliated your father. But I was wrong. You became worse. Robert took a deep breath. But I believe in second chances. My father did. He always said that no man is so lost that he can't find his way back. So my vote is yes, you have 2 years, but Michael, he leaned forward, his eyes intense, if you waste this chance, if you don't truly change, I will personally make sure you spend as much time as possible in prison. Understood? Yes, sir, I understand perfectly. Then it's decided. Robert banged his gavel on the table. Michael Thompson is removed from the position of acting president effective immediately. He will be reassigned as a cleaning assistant under the supervision of Mrs. Helen Parker, salary corresponding to the position, for 2 years. At the end of that period, there will be a new evaluation. He paused. As for the labor lawsuits, we will speak with the affected employees. We will ask them to consider not pressing criminal charges in exchange for adequate financial compensation, to be paid by Michael Thompson himself. All embezzled money must be returned within 6 months, plus 20% interest. Otherwise, criminal charges will be filed immediately. I will return it, Michael promised, every penny. You start Monday, Robert concluded. Arrive at 5 a.m. in the cleaning crew's locker room. Mrs. Helen will give you instructions. This meeting is adjourned. Michael stood up, his legs trembling slightly. As he turned to leave, Robert called him. Michael? Yes? I sincerely hope you find your way back. Not for me, not for the company, but for you, because the man you've become is killing the man you were. Michael just nodded, unable to speak. He left the room with Sarah and Helen waiting in the hallway. So? Sarah asked, though from her look she already knew the answer. 2 years, I start Monday, Helen nodded. Then I'll see you at 5 a.m. Don't be late and bring your own uniform. I'll write down where you can buy one. She handed him a paper with the address of a store in the city center. Michael looked at the paper and then at Helen. "Thank you," he said sincerely, "for believing I can change." "I don't know if you can," Helen replied honestly, "but I'll give you the chance to prove it. Don't waste it." In the following days, the news of what had happened at Michael Thompson's company spread quickly, not only among the employees but throughout the business community of New York City. Some thought he was being treated too leniently. Others saw the punishment as creative and appropriate. But everyone agreed on one thing. It was unprecedented. Michael spent the weekend in his penthouse apartment, the apartment he had bought with stolen money. He looked at the expensive walls, the designer furniture, the privileged view, and everything seemed fake, empty. Monuments to his own vanity. On Saturday, he began calculating how much he would need to return. The total was terrifying. Even by selling the apartment, the car, and the yacht, it still wouldn't be enough. He would have to sell everything, absolutely everything, and even then, it wouldn't be enough to make up for what he had done. On Sunday night, he barely slept. When the alarm went off at 4:30 on Monday morning, he had been awake for hours. Michael put on the navy blue uniform he had bought. It was simple, functional, unbranded, so different from the Italian suits he was used to. He looked at himself in the mirror and hardly recognized himself. The commute to the company was surreal. He had sold the imported car on Saturday, and now he was taking the bus. The first bus ride of his life in 15 years. It was crowded, cramped, hot. People pushing, some still sleepy, others already exhausted before the day began. When he arrived at the company building at 5 o'clock sharp, Helen was already there, along with 5 other members of the cleaning crew. They all looked at Michael with curiosity mixed with suspicion. "Punctual," Helen observed. "That's good. Everyone, this is Michael. He will be working with us for the next 2 years. Yes, he is the former president, but here, he's just another member of the team. Understood?" Murmurs of agreement, though the looks were still skeptical. "Michael, these are your colleagues, Joan, Roger, Sonia, Anthony, and Faith. You will learn from them, and you will do what they do. No privileges, no exceptions." "Understood," Michael replied. "Good. First day, you're with me. I'll show you the basics. After that, you'll rotate between departments. 1 week with each person until you learn all the functions." Helen led him to the cleaning supply storage room. It was a small, cramped space with a strong smell of disinfectant. "Grab a bucket, a mop, cloth, supplies. Let's start on the 7th floor." The first few hours were brutal, not because of the physical difficulty, although Michael discovered muscles he didn't know he had, but because of the humiliation of seeing former colleagues pass by him and look away. Some chuckled discreetly, others made snide remarks, loud enough for him to hear. "Look who's fallen from grace," a young executive murmured to another as Michael cleaned the 7th floor bathroom. "Karma," the other replied. "He humiliated so many people. Now it's his turn." Helen, cleaning the sinks next to Michael, heard but said nothing. She just kept working. When they took their breakfast break at 8, Michael was exhausted. His back ached, his hands were red and rough from the chemicals. He sat in the staff cafeteria, a small, simple space he had never visited before. The other cleaning crew members sat at the next table, but didn't invite him to join. Michael ate alone, feeling the weight of isolation. At the end of the first day, when he finally got home at 6 in the evening, Michael could barely move. Every muscle in his body screamed in pain. He took a long shower, but even the hot water couldn't fully relieve the discomfort. As he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he thought about the day. It had been humiliating, exhausting, painful, and it would be like this for 2 years. But for the first time in a long time, Michael felt he was paying for his mistakes, and strangely that brought a small sense of relief. The following weeks established a routine. Wake up at 4:30, crowded bus, cleaning work from 5 to 6, coffee break, more cleaning until lunch, short break, work until 6, crowded bus back home, home by 7, sleep, repeat. Michael discovered that physical work was much more demanding than he had imagined. It wasn't just pushing a mop or wiping surfaces. It was the attention to detail, the efficiency in movements, the endurance to keep going when his body begged to stop. Gradually, the other team members began to interact with him, not in a friendly way, but at least professionally. They corrected him when he did something wrong, showed him more efficient techniques, taught him the secrets of the trade. It was Roger, a man in his 40s with huge hands and a rare smile, who first showed him kindness. "You're holding the squeegee wrong," he said one morning 3 weeks after Michael had started. "Like that, your back will end up ruined. Let me show you." He demonstrated the correct technique, explaining the ideal angle, how to use body weight instead of brute force. "Thank you," Michael said, genuinely grateful. "No need to thank me. We have to look out for each other down here." Roger shrugged. "No one else is going to do it." During the coffee break that day, Roger gestured for Michael to sit with the group. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot. "So, how's it going?" Joan asked. She was the oldest on the team, in her 60s, with graying hair and sharp eyes. "The fall from the top?" "Hard," Michael admitted, "but necessary." "Necessary?" Anthony, the youngest, just in his 20s, laughed humorlessly. "You think 2 years of cleaning floors pay for everything you did?" "No," Michael answered honestly. "They don't. But it's a start." "A start," Anthony repeated, shaking his head. "You know my mother worked here as a cleaner for 20 years, and you fired her because she missed 3 days when my little brother was in the hospital with pneumonia." The silence at the table grew heavy. Michael felt the blood drain from his face. "Anthony, She was 58. Not much formal education. Getting another job was almost impossible. She ended up working as a house cleaner, earning a pittance. That was 3 years ago. To this day, we're still recovering financially." "I'm sorry." "Are you?" Anthony stood up abruptly. "My mother was depressed for almost a year. She felt useless, worthless, all because you decided her life was worth less than your convenience." He left, leaving the silence behind. Michael looked at the others at the table. "He's right. I have no excuse." "No, you don't," Joan agreed. "But you know what surprises me? The fact that you're here. Most people in your place would have run away, would have hired expensive lawyers, found legal loopholes, disappeared in some country with no extradition." "I thought about it," Michael admitted. "On Sunday before starting, I thought about catching a flight somewhere far away. But then I remembered my father. I remembered what he taught me about taking responsibility. And I realized that running away would only prove I'm even worse than everyone thinks." Faith, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. She was a woman in her 40s, always quiet, always observing. "My father always said that the true measure of a man isn't how many times he falls, but how many times he gets back up. You fell pretty deep, Michael. The question is, are you really going to try to get up, or is all this just a performance?" "I don't know," Michael answered honestly. "I want to believe I can change, but sometimes I wonder if I'm not too damaged, if I haven't destroyed so much that there's no way back." "That's the first honest thing you've said," Helen, who had approached without them noticing, commented. "Doubt is good. Doubt means you're really thinking, not just pretending." She sat down at the table with them. "But let me tell you something, Michael. Change isn't a moment, it's not a single decision. It's a choice you make every day, every hour, in every little action. You may have chosen to start this path, but you'll have to keep choosing it every day." "And if I fail?" "Then you failed," Helen shrugged, "and you'll have to live with it. But at least you tried, and that's more than most people do." The months went by. Michael became more and more integrated into the team. He learned not just the cleaning techniques, but the stories of each person. Roger had 2 children to support alone after his wife died of cancer 6 years earlier. Joan cared for her 93-year-old mother who had Alzheimer's. Faith was paying for her eldest son's college, the first in the family to pursue higher education. Sonia, whom he had barely noticed before, was recovering from an abusive relationship and worked 2 jobs to rebuild her life. Each story was a reminder of how blind he had been to the suffering around him. One morning, 6 months after starting, Michael was cleaning the 12th floor when he heard shouts coming from one of the offices. He recognized one of the voices. It was Frank Davis, the company's new president, a man Michael had promoted years ago. The other voice belonged to a young employee, and she was crying. "Mr. Davis, please, I need this job. My daughter is sick and—" "And you think that's my problem?" Frank shouted. "You missed 3 days last month. That's unacceptable." Michael stopped cleaning. That conversation was painfully familiar. It was exactly the kind of thing he used to do. Without thinking much, he walked into the office. Frank and the young employee stopped and looked at him. "What do you want?" Frank asked, annoyed. "We're in the middle of a private conversation." "I know," Michael said, "and that's why I'm here, to tell you you're wrong." Frank blinked, surprised. "Excuse me." "This woman," Michael pointed to the employee, "has a sick daughter. She needs this job to pay for the treatment. And you're threatening to fire her because she missed 3 days to care for the child? That's none of your business, Thompson. You're a janitor now. Get back to your work." "No," Michael took a step forward. "Because I used to be you. I've had this exact conversation with dozens of people, and I was wrong every time." The young employee looked from one to the other, tears still streaming down her face. "Do you want to know what happens when you fire someone in this situation?" Michael continued. "This woman will lose her health insurance. She'll have to take her daughter out of treatment. She'll have to look for another job, but no one hires you when you've been fired. She'll get desperate, take any work, probably earn less. And the daughter. The daughter will suffer because you decided that numbers are more important than people." Frank clenched his fists. "Get out of my office, now. Not before you promise to give her a chance, a real chance. Let her work part-time for a few months while she cares for her daughter. Adjust the salary proportionally. And when the child gets better, she goes back to full-time. You have no authority to—" "I know I have no authority," Michael interrupted. "But I have experience of being an arrogant idiot who destroyed lives because of ego and numbers. And I'm telling you, Frank, you don't want to become what I was." Frank looked at the employee and then back at Michael. For a long moment, no one said anything. "Please, Mr. Davis," the young woman finally spoke. "I promise I'll make up for it. I'll work extra when my daughter gets better. I just need some time. That's all." Frank sighed, running his hand through his hair. "Fine. Part-time for 3 months, but no delays, no more unexcused absences. Is that clear?" Yes, sir. Thank you so much." She quickly got up and left, before he could change his mind. When they were alone, Frank turned to Michael. "You know you just made me look weak in front of her, right?" "No," Michael replied. "I made you look human. And in the long run, she'll work harder and better because she knows the company cares about her." Frank sat in his chair, studying Michael with curiosity. "You've changed, really." "I'm trying," Michael admitted. "But it's hard. Every day I see things that remind me of who I was, and every day I have to choose to be different. Helen was right about you." "What?" "She said you could change, that beneath the arrogance there was a good person." "I didn't believe her," Frank admitted. "I thought it was her naivety, but maybe she was right." Michael didn't respond. He just returned to the hallway and continued his cleaning work. The news of the incident spread quickly. Helen called him at the end of the day. "So you're interfering with management decisions now?" she asked, but there was a slight smile on her lips. "I know I shouldn't have—" "No, you did right," Helen interrupted him. "But do you understand why it was right? Because that woman needed help. Partially, but also because you used your experience positively. You saw a situation you recognized and tried to prevent someone else from making your mistakes. That's growth. Helen, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you believe in me, even when no one else did?" Helen stayed silent for a moment, thinking. "Because I saw my own son in you?" Michael blinked, surprised. Helen rarely spoke about her personal life. "You have a son?" "Had," she corrected, her voice growing softer. "Junior. He passed away 8 years ago." "Helen, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "How would you? You never asked. Nobody asks about the lives of cleaners." There was no accusation in her voice, just fact. "Junior was very much like you. Brilliant, ambitious, hard-working. He got a scholarship to university, graduated in business administration, Started working at a large company. She looked out the window at the city outside, and then success started to change him, just like it changed you. He became obsessed with climbing up, earning more, being more, stopped visiting, stopped calling. When I called, he was always too busy. One day I got a call from the hospital. He had collapsed at work. Stress, they said. Overwork. Burnout. Did he recover? Physically, yes, but something inside him had broken. He tried to return to work but had a breakdown, stopped eating, stopped leaving his apartment, fell into a deep depression. Helen wiped away an escaped tear. I tried to help. Tried to make him see that work wasn't worth more than his health. But he couldn't accept what he saw as failure. One day he just passed away. His heart gave out. The doctors said it was prolonged stress. He was only 32 years old. Michael felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. That's why you gave me a chance. You saw your son in me. I did. And I couldn't save Junior, but I thought maybe I could help you. I know I'm foolish. I know you might just be acting. But I had to try. For him. You're not foolish, Michael said firmly. And I'm not acting. I swear. Everything you've done for me, all the patience, all the faith, I won't waste it. Helen studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Good. Because we still have a year and a half ahead of us, and there's a lot of work to do. As the months continued to pass, Michael began to notice deeper changes in himself. It wasn't just the physical work. It was how he saw the world. He started noticing things that had been invisible before. The mothers taking children to school on the crowded bus at 6 in the morning. The workers sleeping on their way back home, exhausted from long shifts. The people working multiple jobs just to survive. One day at the supermarket, he saw a woman quietly crying as she put back items she couldn't afford on the shelf. He approached her. "Excuse me, do you need help?" She looked at him, frightened and embarrassed. "No, I'm fine." Michael saw her cart, diapers, milk, basic food, essential things for a small child. "Let me help," he said gently, picking up the items she had returned and putting them in her cart. "No, sir, I can't accept." "Please. I used to be someone who had a lot and helped little. Now I have little, but I want to help where I can." She began to cry more intensely. Michael paid for her groceries without saying anything else, just a slight smile when she thanked him repeatedly. When he left the supermarket, he realized he had spent half of his weekly salary. But for the first time in years, he felt his money had been used for something that truly mattered. At work, he began to be accepted not just as part of the team, but as a friend. Anthony, who had been so hostile at first, started talking to him during breaks. "My mother is doing better now," he said one morning. "She got a steady job at a school. It doesn't pay much, but it's stable." "That's good. I'm really happy for her." Anthony looked at him for a moment. "You know, when you started here, I was sure you wouldn't last a week. I thought it was all a show for the cameras. But you've been here almost a year, and you seem genuine." "I try. I don't always succeed, but I try. That's more than most would do." Michael's relationship with Helen also evolved. She became not just a supervisor, but a mentor and friend. During lunches, they talked about everything. She told stories about her son, about her 30 years working in cleaning, about the joys and sorrows she had seen over the years. Michael, in turn, opened up about his own journey, about the father he admired, about how ambition had slowly poisoned his soul, about the emptiness he felt even when he was at the top. "I had everything," he said one day. "Money, power, respect, at least that's what I thought. But when I look back, I realize I had nothing. No real friendships, no true connections, just people who feared me or wanted something from me." "And now?" Helen asked. Michael looked around the simple cafeteria. Roger laughing at a joke Joan told. Faith helping Sonia with a family problem. Anthony showing photos of his youngest nephew on his phone. Now I have friends for real. People who care about me not for what I can do for them, but just because I'm me. It's strange. I have less money, less status, less everything. But I feel richer than ever." Helen smiled. "That's called purpose. You've finally found a purpose beyond yourself." But not everything was smooth progress. There were moments of setback. One afternoon, an executive from another company came to visit and recognized Michael cleaning the floor. "Thompson? Michael Thompson." The man stopped, looking in disbelief. "I can't believe it. I heard the rumors, but I thought they were exaggerated." Michael felt the familiar shame rising. For a moment, he wanted to throw the mop on the floor and leave. Go back to... To what? He had nothing left to go back to. "Hi, Henry," he greeted calmly. "Man, what happened? You were one of the best in the field." "I was an arrogant fool who treated people like garbage," Michael answered honestly. "That's what happened." Henry seemed uncomfortable. "Look, I'm not judging. We all do things we regret. But this," he gestured to the cleaning uniform, "is a bit extreme, isn't it? For you, maybe. For me, it's necessary." "I see." Henry clearly didn't understand. "Well, if you need a recommendation in the future, if you want to get back into the market—" "Thank you, but no," Michael interrupted him. "I have a commitment to fulfill. There's still a year left." Henry shook his head, confused, and moved on. But that encounter stirred something in Michael. That night he found himself questioning his choices. Was it really necessary to continue with that? Hadn't he already learned the lesson? It was Paul Henry who found him the next day, during the break. The young man who had lost his last hours with his mother because of Michael. "I heard you met with Henry Cooper yesterday," Paul said, sitting next to Michael. "News travels fast." "It always does. I also heard he offered to help you get back into the market." "He did." "And you refused?" "I did." Paul fell silent for a moment. "You know, it still hurts. Thinking about that last conversation I didn't have with my mother. I still blame myself for not disobeying you and going to the hospital anyway." Michael felt the familiar tightness in his chest. "Paul, Let me finish." Paul raised his hand. "It hurts. It always will. But I've realized something these past months. You're not the same person anymore. And while none of this brings my mother back, while none of this undoes what happened, seeing you here, really trying to be better, it helps a little." "It helps?" "It helps because it means her suffering wasn't completely in vain. That something good came out of all this. That maybe you've learned and other people won't suffer what my mother suffered." Paul got up to leave, but stopped and looked back. "Keep going. Keep being this better person. Not for me. Not for my mother. For all the other people who can still benefit from your change." Those words stayed with Michael. They sustained him through the difficult days that followed. When his back hurt too much. When the humiliation seemed too great. When the temptation to give up was strong. The first year of work as a cleaning assistant finally came to an end. During this time, Michael had not only learned to do the work, but to value it. He now understood the dignity in honest work. The importance of every role, no matter how small it seemed. In a special meeting called by the board, Robert Fletcher summoned Michael. "So, 1 year," Robert said, studying Michael closely. "How was it?" "Transformative," Michael replied simply. "Transformative. Interesting word." Robert leaned back in his chair. "You know you could have left at any time, right? Technically, you weren't trapped here. You could have just given up." "I know." "But you didn't give up. Why?" Michael thought carefully before answering. "Because I owed it. To the people I hurt. To myself. To my father. And because for the first time in many years, I was doing something that had real meaning." Robert nodded slowly. "The reason for this meeting is simple. The first year is over. You've fulfilled half of your commitment. We, as the board, wanted to assess your progress and decide whether you should continue for the second year or if Michael felt his heart race, if you might be ready for a different role in the company. Not back to the top, understand, but maybe something intermediate, supervision, internal consulting, something like that." Michael looked at the people around the table. Sarah was there, as were some other board members. But what caught his attention most was Helen sitting discreetly in a corner. "Can I be honest?" he asked. "Please." "I'm not ready. I learned a lot in this first year, about hard work, about humility, about the value of every person. But I still have much to learn, and I think in the second year I need to learn something different. What would that be? How to teach, how to help others avoid my mistakes, how to use my experience both at the top and at the bottom to build a bridge of understanding. Sarah leaned forward, interested. Go on. In recent months, I've been thinking a lot about the company's structures, about how there's such a big disconnect between executives and frontline employees, how decisions are made up there without understanding the impact down here, and how people down here feel invisible, without a voice. And what would your proposal be? Let me continue in cleaning, but also let me create a program where executives regularly spend time working in different departments, not observing but actually working, and where frontline employees can share their ideas and concerns directly with leadership. Robert exchanged looks with the other board members. That's unconventional. It was unconventional to make me work as a cleaner too, Michael pointed out, but it worked. He's right, Helen finally spoke, her voice cutting through the silence. And I agree with the proposal. Let him finish the second year in cleaning, but let me work with him on developing this program. Between the two of us, we have the complete perspective. His from top to bottom, mine from the bottom, witnessing the top. Sarah tapped the table softly. I like it. I like it a lot, and I think this could solve many of the communication problems we've identified. Other members agreed. Finally, Robert turned to Michael. All right, so that's it. You continue in cleaning for the second year, but you'll also start working maybe 2 hours a day with Helen on developing this program. Salary adjusted to reflect the additional responsibilities. Do you agree? Perfectly. There's one more thing. Robert opened a folder in front of him. The money. Did you manage to return it all? Michael nodded. I sold the apartment, the car, the yacht, everything. I returned the full amount, plus the 20% interest as agreed. The remainder is being used to compensate the employees I directly harmed. Where are you living now? I share a small apartment with Roger, Michael answered. From the cleaning crew, he needed help with rent, and I needed a place to live. A small smile appeared on Robert's face. Michael Thompson sharing an apartment, and if someone had told me that 2 years ago, I would have laughed in their face. I would have laughed too, Michael admitted, but it ended up being one of the best decisions I made. Roger is a good man, and his kids are amazing. They taught me a lot about what really matters. The meeting ended with the decision made. Michael would continue in cleaning, but would also start developing the new program for integration between hierarchical levels. In the following months, the workload doubled. Michael still woke up at 4:30, cleaned until 3 in the afternoon, and then spent 2 hours working with Helen on the program. They created a detailed curriculum, established rules, invited volunteers from the executive department. The initial response was lukewarm at best. Why would I waste my time cleaning bathrooms? A marketing manager complained during an initial presentation. My time is valuable. I was hired to do marketing, not to be a cleaner. Michael, standing next to Helen at the front of the room, took a deep breath. The old anger tried to emerge, the desire to put that arrogant man in his place, but he pushed it down. Your time is valuable, he agreed. But have you ever stopped to think if the decisions you make with that valuable time are taking into account the reality of half the employees in this company? I don't need to clean floors to understand employees. You don't? Helen intervened. Then tell me, how long does it take to clean a medium-sized corporate bathroom following the company's hygiene standards? The manager blinked. I don't know. 23 minutes if done correctly, Helen replied. And there are 40 bathrooms in this building. That means roughly 15 hours of work just on bathrooms every day, but we only have 8 people on the cleaning team. How do you think we managed to cover everything? I hadn't thought about that. Exactly, you didn't think, because you've never had to. But your marketing decisions, your campaigns, your events, they all create extra work for the cleaning staff. And when you don't understand their work, you can't plan properly. The manager fell silent, clearly uncomfortable. It was Frank Davis, the current president, who finally broke the impasse. I'll participate, he announced, standing up. 1 week. I'll work in cleaning for a full week. Murmurs of surprise filled the room. "Mr. Davis, with all due respect, you don't need to—" Sarah began. "I do need to," Frank interrupted her. "If we're going to ask other executives to do this, I have to lead by example. Besides," he looked at Michael, "someone once stopped me from making a huge mistake, from becoming something I didn't want to be. I owe him at least this much." Frank's participation changed everything. In the following days, other executives started volunteering. Some genuinely interested, others clearly doing it out of social obligation, but everyone participated. The results were surprising. Executives who spent a week in cleaning started making different decisions. They planned events considering the cleaning work that would follow. They requested adjustments for better quality cleaning products. They supported pay raises for the team. But most importantly, they started seeing the cleaning staff as people. They greeted them by name, stopped to chat, asked about their families. The company culture began to slowly change, and at the center of this change was Michael, the man who had been the embodiment of everything wrong and who now worked tirelessly to fix it. However, not everything was perfect. There was resistance. A group of older executives flatly refused to participate in the program. "This is ridiculous," one of them, Richard Brooks, the financial director, stated openly in a board meeting. "We're not janitors. We were hired for our expertise, not to push mops." "The program is voluntary," Robert Fletcher reminded. "No one is being forced." "But there's clearly social pressure, an implicit judgment of who participates and who doesn't." "Maybe because there is a judgment to be made," Michael spoke, knowing he was taking a risk. "Maybe executives who refuse to understand the work of half their employees shouldn't be in leadership positions." Richard turned to him, eyes narrowed. "You have no authority to tell me what to do, Thompson. You're a janitor now, remember?" "I am a janitor, and I'm proud of it. But I'm also someone who learned the hard way that arrogance and contempt for others only leave you empty and alone. So yes, Richard, I will tell you, if you think you're above understanding the work people do for you, you're above nothing. You're just a blind fool." The silence in the room was absolute. Michael had just insulted one of the company's most powerful executives in front of the entire board. Richard turned red. "This is insubordination. I demand that—" "Demand what?" Robert interrupted. "That he be fired, disciplined. Richard, when was the last time you spent real time with employees who aren't at your level?" I interact with my direct reports regularly." "Your direct reports are all managers with six-figure salaries," Robert pointed out. "When was the last time you talked to someone from cleaning, from reception, from the cafeteria?" Richard didn't answer. "I thought—" Robert sighed. "Look, you're right. The program is voluntary. If you don't want to participate, no one can force you, but think about it. Think about the kind of leader you want to be." The meeting ended with tension in the air. But strangely, in the following days, something changed. Richard began to be seen on the lower floors, talking to employees, observing the work being done. He never formally joined the cleaning program, but he started showing more respect. It was a reminder that change doesn't need to be dramatic to be real. As the second year progressed, Michael continued working both in the cleaning and the integration program. The program grew beyond expectations. Other companies began to hear about it and ask for details. Articles were written in business magazines. Invitations to speak started coming in, but Michael refused them all. He still wasn't ready to be a spokesperson for anything. There was still much work to do. One afternoon, near the end of the second year, Michael was cleaning the main hall when a woman entered the building. She appeared to be in her 70s with completely white hair and trembling hands. She looked around, clearly searching for someone. Michael approached. "Can I help you, ma'am?" She studied him for a moment. "Are you Michael Thompson?" "Yes, I am." "My name is Rose Sanders. I was Anthony's mother." Michael felt his blood run cold. Anthony's mother. The woman he had fired years ago. "Mrs. Rose, Let me speak first." She raised a trembling hand. "My son told me about you, about what happened, about how you changed. I came here because I needed to see with my own eyes." Michael waited. his heart pounding. "When you fired me," she continued, her voice calm but firm, "I thought my life was over. I was 58 years old, little education, few options. I spent months in depression. My children suffered because I couldn't work properly. Mrs. Rose, I'm so sorry. If I could turn back time—" "Don't interrupt," she said gently. "But here's the thing. That bad period forced me to change. It forced me to find other ways to work, and eventually I found something better. Not at first, no. At first it was terrible, but over time things got better. And now looking back, I realized that maybe it needed to happen. Ma'am, I'm not saying you were right to fire me. You were wrong, very wrong. But I'm saying that from the pain came growth, for me, and from what I see, for you too." Tears began to fall down Michael's face. "Why did you come to tell me this?" "Because my son told me you still carry a lot of guilt. And while it's right that you carry some," she lightly touched his arm, "it's also important that you learn to forgive yourself. You can't live the rest of your life just paying for past mistakes. At some point, you need to start living for the future." "I don't know if I deserve forgiveness." "No one deserves forgiveness," Rose said wisely. "That's why it's called grace. It's something given freely, not earned." She stayed a few more minutes, talking about her current work, about how her children were doing well, about her hopes for the future. Then she left, leaving Michael there, crying silently in the middle of the empty hall. Helen found him like that. "What happened?" Michael told her. When he finished, Helen hugged him. It was the first time in 2 years that she had done so. "You're learning the hardest lesson of all," she said, "how to receive forgiveness and kindness when you think you don't deserve it." The last months of the second year passed quickly. The integration program was working well. The company culture had visibly changed. There was less turnover, more employee satisfaction, better online reviews. And Michael? Michael had become an integral part of the cleaning team, but also something more. He was a bridge between worlds that rarely connected. He was respected not for his former power, but for his current humility. Finally, the last day of the second year arrived. A meeting was scheduled with the board to evaluate Michael's future at the company. When he entered the meeting room, he was surprised to see that it wasn't just the board members present. There were also Roger, Joan, Faith, Sonia, Anthony, and several other cleaning staff. Paul Henry was there, as were Carly Miller and others whom Michael had wronged years ago. "Please sit down," Robert Fletcher began. "Today marks the end of a 2-year agreement, an agreement we all thought would be just punishment, but which became something much greater." He looked directly at Michael. "Michael Thompson, 2 years ago you were a ruined man, arrogant, cruel, a thief. You had lost your way so completely that it seemed impossible you could ever come back. But you did come back." Robert stood up and walked until he was standing in front of Michael. "You didn't just serve your sentence, you embraced it. You didn't just work, you transformed. And not just yourself, but this entire company." "I had help," Michael said quickly. "A lot of help, Helen, Sarah, Roger, everyone here." "Roger, I couldn't have done it alone." "That's true," Robert agreed. "But you also did the work. And now we've come to a crossroads. Your commitment is fulfilled. But the question is, what's the next step?" "I have a proposal." Sarah stood up. "But before I present it, I want a few people to speak." Helen was the first. "When Michael started working with me, I admit I had doubts, many doubts. But over the last 2 years, I've seen a man truly change. Not change his appearance or his words, but change his essence. He became someone who understands that leadership isn't about power, but about service." Roger was next. "Michael has shared an apartment with me for over a year. I've seen how he lives. Simple, humble, hard-working. He helps my kids with their homework. Shares what little he has with me without a second thought. He's the kind of person you want by your side." One by one, others stood up and spoke. Paul Henry said he forgave Michael for the past and saw hope for the future in him. Carly Miller said her life had improved since the company culture changed, and she credited much of that to the program Michael helped create. Even Anthony stood up. "My mother came here a few months ago. I didn't know it at the time, but she came to speak with Michael. She told me later that she saw something rare in him, True remorse and true change. If my mother can forgive him, so can I. When everyone had finished speaking, Sarah finally presented her proposal. Michael, the board has deliberated extensively about your future here. There are a few options. You could return as a consultant. You could be promoted to manager of the new integration program. You could even, eventually, return to an executive position. She paused. But I have a different proposal, one that I think fits better with who you've become. Sarah slid a folder across the table to Michael. We want to create a new position, Director of Employee Culture and Well-Being. It would be your responsibility to ensure the cultural change we started continues, that employees at all levels are treated with dignity, that the integration program not only continues, but grows, and that no one in this company ever feels invisible or worthless again. Michael opened the folder, looking at the detailed job description, the proposed salary, the objectives. This is amazing, but I don't know if I'm qualified. You are the most qualified person there is, Robert said, because you have lived at both extremes. You know the poison of arrogance and the remedy of humility. There's one condition, Helen added with a small smile. You have to keep working 1 day a month in cleaning, always. No matter how high you climb, 1 day a month you go back to the basics, to remember, to stay grounded. Michael felt tears fill his eyes. I accept, but with an addition to the condition. What? I want to work not just 1 day a month, but 1 week every quarter. I don't just want to remember where I came from. I want to stay connected, truly connected. Robert extended his hand. Then we have a deal. Michael shook his hand, feeling the weight and importance of the moment. We do. Applause filled the room. People who had every reason to hate him were now celebrating his success, not because he had returned to the top, but because he had found something better than the top. He had found purpose. In the months that followed, Michael immersed himself in his new role. He expanded the integration program to include all departments, created communication channels where employees at any level could express concerns directly, established regular salary reviews based on the actual cost of living, implemented support programs for employees facing difficulties. But he also kept his promise. Every quarter, he spent an entire week working in cleaning, and every Monday, he arrived at 5 in the morning to clean alongside Helen and the team. The company thrived under this new culture. Happy employees meant better productivity. Better productivity meant better results. Better results attracted better clients. And everything created a virtuous cycle. But more important than financial success was human success. People who once lived in fear of losing their jobs now worked with confidence. Families who struggled to survive now had stability. Children who once went hungry because their parents barely earned enough now had their needs met. 1 year after taking on his new position, Michael was in his office when he received an envelope with no sender. Inside was a handwritten letter with handwriting he recognized immediately. It was from his father. Michael had avoided contact with his father throughout his time working in cleaning. He felt too ashamed to explain what he had become and what he was doing to redeem himself. But Helen, in secret, had kept Joseph Thompson informed of everything. The letter was short. My son, Helen, told me everything, about your failures, about your redemption, about the man you have become. I won't lie and say I wasn't disappointed when I learned what you did. I was. Very. I raised you to be better than that. But now, reading about your cleaning work, about the program you created, about the lives you changed, I feel something different. I feel pride. Not pride for the success you had or the money you earned. Pride for the man you chose to become after falling. Anyone can be successful when everything is easy, but only special people can get up when they are at rock bottom. You are that special person, Michael, and I am proud to be your father. Come visit when you can. We have much to talk about. With love, Dad. Michael read the letter 5 times, tears staining the paper. That night, for the first time in 3 years, he called his father. They talked for hours, laughing and crying, healing wounds that had been open for too long. The following week, Michael visited Joseph Thompson. His father was older, more fragile, but his eyes still shone with that quiet wisdom Michael remembered from childhood. "You look different," Joseph observed as they had coffee in the small house where Michael had grown up. "Lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from your shoulders." "It has," Michael agreed. "I spent so many years carrying unnecessary weight, the weight of ambition, of greed, of pride. Now I only carry what matters." "And what matters?" "People, real connections, making a difference in someone's life, even if small. Waking up in the morning and knowing the work I do helps others live better." Joseph nodded, smiling. "You've learned what took me a lifetime to understand. Real success isn't measured in money or titles. It's measured in lives touched, in kindnesses given, in love shared." They spent the day together, visiting the old places from Michael's childhood. The school where he studied, the park where he played soccer, the small market where his father sometimes bought treats when he had extra money. Each place was a memory of values Michael had forgotten, but now rediscovered. When the day ended and Michael prepared to leave, Joseph held him by the shoulders. "Michael, I want you to know something. I've already forgiven you. But more importantly, you need to forgive yourself. You're no longer that man who did terrible things. You're the man who chose to change. Honor that by living well." "I'll try, Dad." "Don't try. Do it." Returning to New York City, Michael reflected on the conversation, forgiving himself. It seemed so simple, but it was the hardest thing. He still carried guilt for every person he had hurt, every life he had damaged. But perhaps, just perhaps, it was time to let some of that guilt go. Not to forget what he did, but to have the energy to do better in the future. At work the following Monday, he arrived at 5 in the morning as always for his monthly cleaning day. Helen was there, as she always was. "How was the visit with your father?" she asked as they prepared the materials. "Transformative. He told me to forgive myself." "Wise man, your father," Helen smiled. "You know it's okay to let the past go, right? Not forget, but let go of the weight." "I'm learning." They worked in silence for a while, the familiar rhythm of grabbing the bucket, wetting the cloth, wiping the floor. There was something meditative about it, something that calmed the mind. "Helen," Michael stopped suddenly. "I never thanked you properly." "Thanked me for what?" "For saving me. For believing in me when no one else did. For giving me the chance to be better." Helen stopped too, looking at him with those wise eyes that had seen so much. "I didn't save you, Michael. You saved yourself. I just held the door open. You're the one who chose to walk through it. Even so, thank you. You're welcome, and thank you too. For what? For letting me see that my faith in people isn't naive, that people really can change, that my son, if he'd had the chance, might have changed too. You gave me hope." They continued working, but now there was something different in the air, a feeling of peace, of a full circle, of a journey reaching not an end, but a new beginning. The following years were of steady growth. The integration program Michael started spread to other companies. He began to be invited for talks, for consultations, to help other organizations build more humane cultures. But he always kept his roots. He always spent that quarterly week cleaning. He always arrived early on Mondays. He always treated every person, no matter the position, with dignity and respect. His story became known, not as a traditional success story, but as something deeper, a story of real redemption, of a man who fell to the bottom and chose to climb back, not to regain what he lost, but to become something better. Employees who had been harmed by him in the past found peace. Some never fully forgave him, and Michael accepted that. Forgiveness couldn't be forced, but everyone recognized he had genuinely changed. Frank Davis, the president, became a strong ally. Together they transformed the company into a benchmark, not just in financial results, but in social responsibility and employee well-being. And Michael found something he never had when he was a wealthy and powerful president. He found peace. He found real friendships. He found purpose that went beyond himself. One afternoon, 5 years after starting his work in cleaning, Michael was in his office reviewing proposals for expanding the program when he heard a knock at the door. Come in." The door opened and a young woman entered. She must have been in her early 20s, with determined eyes and a resume in her hand. "Mr. Thompson, my name is Isabella Sanders. I'm the daughter of Anthony from the cleaning crew. I'm graduating in business administration and wanted to speak with you about opportunities at the company." Michael smiled, remembering Anthony, who had been so hostile at first, but had become a true friend. "Of course, have a seat. Tell me about yourself." As Isabella talked about her education, her aspirations, her dreams, Michael felt something stir in his heart. Here was the daughter of a man who worked in cleaning, seeking opportunities in administration. In one generation, a family was moving up economically, and he, Michael, had helped create the environment that made this possible, not just for Isabella, but for dozens of other children whose parents worked at the company. "You know, Isabella," he said when she finished, "I see a lot of myself in your enthusiasm. But I hope you learn the lessons I took too long to learn. That success isn't just about climbing up, but about lifting others as you rise." "My father always tells me your story," Isabella replied. "He says you're proof that people can change, and that it doesn't matter where we start, but where we choose to go. Your father is a wise man. He also says you still have much to do, that the journey isn't over." Michael laughed. "He's right. The journey never really ends, does it? It just keeps evolving." He offered Isabella a position in the company's internship program, not out of favoritism, but because she was genuinely qualified, and he would personally take responsibility for mentoring her, ensuring she had every opportunity she deserved. When Isabella left, Michael was alone in his office. He looked around. It was a beautiful, comfortable space, but not ostentatious. There were photos on the walls, not of awards or certificates, but of people. The cleaning crew, employees who had benefited from the programs, children at company events, and in the center a photo of him and Helen, both in cleaning uniforms, smiling after a long day's work. That photo captured everything: the journey of fall and redemption, the transformation from pride to humility, the discovery that real value comes from how we treat others, not how others treat us. Michael picked up the phone and called Helen. "Hi, I just wanted to say I'll be in early tomorrow. 5 a.m. as always." "You never miss," Helen said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "I'll never miss. No matter how many years pass, no matter where my career goes, that Monday morning, that hour in cleaning, is my anchor. It's what keeps me real." "See you tomorrow then." "And Michael?" "Yes?" "I'm proud of you, not for the success you've achieved again, but for the person you've become." After hanging up, Michael sat in the silence of his office. Outside, the city buzzed with millions of people living their lives, people working, struggling, loving, suffering, hoping, and he, Michael Thompson, had once been so above them that he saw them only as numbers. But now he understood. Every person had a story, every person mattered, every person deserved dignity. That simple truth, which Helen had tried to teach from the beginning, had become the core of who he was. He was no longer the arrogant businessman who humiliated employees, but he wasn't just the humble janitor either. He was something between the two, something new. He was a bridge. He was someone who understood both sides and worked to unite them. And although he could never completely undo the harm he had caused, he could spend the rest of his life doing good, one person at a time, one choice at a time, one day at a time. As the sun set over New York City, casting long shadows across the city, Michael turned off his computer and prepared to go home. Tomorrow would be Monday. He would be back at 5 in the morning in his navy blue uniform, bucket in hand, working alongside people who had seen him at his worst and at his best. And he wouldn't trade that for anything in the world. Because finally, after all those years, after all the pain and transformation, Michael Thompson had found something that money could never buy and power could never provide. He had found redemption, and more importantly, he had found himself. End of story. So what did you think of this story? Did Michael achieve the redemption he was seeking? Do you believe people can really change like he did? Share your honest opinion about this transformation journey in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave your like and especially subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss other moving stories that bring important reflections about life.